We begin the current Daf, Masechta Nazir Daf Mem. Begin 6 lines down at the top of the Yommi, where the Gemara continues with this halacha. Again, this parak is really the second half of the halachas of Naziris. The first half of the Masechta was talking about Kabbalas and Naziris. Now we're talking about Shleisha, meaning the 3 types of prohibitions we speak about that are, we first spoke about the drinking of the wine, which is prohibited, and now we're in the middle of the second category of the prohibition of the hair cutting, and the Gemara continues to qualify what is included in the, again, ironically, in the prohibition of Naziris, which you're not allowed to cut the hair, and then actually when you finish in Naziris, you have to cut your hair, so what's mandatory over there. So we discussed both those criteria. Now, Shit goes about the Bekasik and Cheskel, turning to Daf Yomi, doing today's Daf. Some of the discussed in today's Daf are the Isigiluach, the prohibition of cutting the hair, what will qualify for that violation. Tar, specifically using a razor both in the prohibition and in the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Kolshu, even my new mouth, sticha, what demolishes the hair. The mitzvah of teklachas, like we said, is that with dafka with a tar, with a razor, and shiur regarding if you left over some hair, what happens then? Also, the halacha mitzvah carbon medalis comes up that regarding mitzvah, his carbon can be brought even if you can't afford. So there's you bring a cheaper type of a carbon. Kilu chazaka regarding the halacha of cutting of the beard, meaning what we know as the prohibition about shaving or using a razor, what qualifies as that. And finally, the Gemara ends off with a concept that's brought in Shas, that whenever you find that there's a positive commandment and a negative prohibition that contradict each other. If you can fulfill both, then fine. If you cannot, then the positive commandment overrides the negative prohibition. So begin the current Daf. 6 lines down at the top of the Yommi. Rabbi Shloimy says that, and this relates to the previous Daf that we had brought a brisa, that if you tell a shmir tzitzis culture minayin that tamalim aliyav leisha, we said Nazir is liable for shaving his hair by any means, but only if you uproots it complete like a razor. As we learned, what is matam l'tar to tell you taglach zached shibetar. That was the last Gemara we recorded. Rebbe, who he learns out that actually it's a yishnei lav and if a Nazir uses a razor, and now the Gemara comes to so we said that there's the violation. What's the minimum amount of hair for a Nazir who shaves his hair? So Rabbi Shloimy says lulka is to get lashes is be'achas, meaning for one hair he's going to get lashes if they warned him for the hair cutting, and he cut one hair, he's going to get lashes for violating the isav teklachas. Now la'akiv, what does it mean la'akiv? Meaning when he finishes days in Naziris, where the mitzvah of him now actually paradoxically a mitzvah to cut his hair. If he cuts all his hair and leaves over 2 hairs, he didn't fulfill his mitzvah of hair cutting if he left over 2 hairs. So it's just cute. It's like Lukas Ba'achas, La'akav B'shtayim. And then, Lister, the third halacha, to demolish, to forfeit his term of Naziris, that's only if he cuts off most of the hair of his head. Which, as Tais points out, these are all halacha mishmesinai by the laws of Nazir. We don't find any reason for it. But it's only if he shaves most of his hair. So these are 3 different halachas to get lashes. One, to what's ma'akif for your final hair cutting that you have to is if you left over 2, and lista is only b'regulation. Now, so the Gemara now, and Rabbi Shloimy said, and it has to be ubitav. It's with a razor, which Tracy says that's going on the reisha, meaning that you're not going to get lashes only if you do it with a razor, but it will be seiser even if you do it without a razor, or even not like a razor. Even if you cut off most of the hair on the head, it's going to be seiser if you didn't leave over the mountain, even though it's not even like a tar. Okay, fine.
So in the Mishnah, before, when they said to list them, cut it, so if they left over Reish Rubai, then there wouldn't be anything, it wouldn't be seiser the whole years?
If they didn't cut off, if most of the hair on your head is still around, even if let's say they took a razor or one area cut it off, it wouldn't be seiser. Most of the hair was cut off, and it was the amount of, let's say you don't have a growth of 30 days, or achamalais have a growth of 7 days, then it's going to be seiser. But if they left over, then it has to be most of the hair in the head has that deficiency. Now the Gemara says, really? It's only with a razor? Mitar in with a razor, yes, then you get lashes, but something else not? What do you mean? Just learned in the previous daf, but Katani we learned, how do we know to include all those things that get rid of the hair? That if a Nazir cuts his hair, whether with a razor, whether with a scissor, whether it just pulls out that he's going to be chayiv. So we said that you're going to violate him with other things. How are you telling Rav Chizda that the lash is only going to be if you do it with a razor? This is like a razor, that you're uprooting the hairs and you're destroying from the roots. That's what Rav Chizda is saying, that you're going to get lashes even with one hair. Similar in the brisa, that you get lashes for cutting one hair, and that it's going to take away your whole counting if it's most of the hair on the head. As the Brisa says, Nazir shetalash mirat sifsif koshu. If you have a Nazir again that pulls out the hair, whatever which way, even a minute amount, meaning kosher sounds like even one hair that you're going to be chayiv that you need lashes. So you see that halacha, even a kosher, even one hair. But you see the other halacha also in the seiser, it's not going to take away his whole counting, only if it's most of the hair on his head. And ubetar, which again doesn't mean just a razor, means like a razor. Okay, that's one opinion. That's like what we just proved for Rav Chesa. Rabbi Shimon, he says no. He disagrees. He says kishem shishtei sayres ma'akvis boy, just like two hairs are ma'akiv, meaning to say that if you finish the naziras and you do the hair cutting ceremony, you left over two hairs, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of the hair cutting, so it works the other way too. We're going to compare the isser one and the chiyav one. Kach shtei sayres seisus boy. So too, cutting two hairs during his days in naziras is seiser is all kinds. So he disagrees with that. He would hold that if the bandits come and cut just two hairs, they're going to be seiser his naziras. Okay, that's the machlekes, but again, the Tanakh supports that of Rav Chesa. Now, related discussion, the Gemara continues. Tanan Hasan. We learned about it in the Mishnah, which Pei says it's a Bryce and Tres Koinim in the Goyim, but the Ram Ranshbik says the last parak in the Goyim. Either as it may, we learned in the Mishnah that it says like this: Shleish Megalchim. 3 individuals have hair cutting. V'tekalachas mitzvah, and their hair cutting is a mitzvah. Who are these 3 individuals? You have a Nazir. It says in the pasuk, "V'gilach has Rosh Nizri." He has to cut the hair of his head when he finishes. U'mitzayra, where it says "V'gilach has kol zaros," he has to cut all the hair on his body. The Leviim, when the Leviim became Leviim in the Midbar, it says "V'viru ta'al kol b'sachim." They have to make him like a peer. Moshe Rabbeinu went and shaved off all the hair on their body. That's how Kairach's wife started up and saying, "Look what he did to you, made a mockery out of you." All the hair on the body had to be shaved off. Now, says the Brisa, says the Mishnah, now, any one of these 3 requirements, if they cut their hair without a razor, or they left over 2 hairs on the body, never done anything. The Nazir, the Mitzayva, or the Levi has to cut up all the hair, and it has to be with a razor. If you left over 2 hairs, or without a razor, didn't fulfill the obligation. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara quotes the Mishnah and takes it apart piece by piece. You told me Shleish Megalchim, 3 types of individuals do a hair cutting. They kalachas and mitzvah, and their hair cutting is a mitzvah. Says Gemara, Pshita, obviously the kalachas is mitzvah. Each one has a pasuk in the Torah. Says the Gemara, no, when you say Mishonei V'Risahu, what's the whole purpose? Is just to get rid of the hair on the body. And it doesn't say in the Torah that a razor is ma'akiv. And therefore I would have said that even if you smeared some type of a cream that's a deliberatory, that it gets rid of the hair on the body, I would have thought to say that that's going to be enough, which they said that's a wonder, because the Sefer of the Mishnah explicitly says, it says, how can you tell me that that's what it means when it says Tekalachas Mitzvah is coming to tell me that you need to be a razor? The Sefer of the Mishnah explicitly says if you do the razor, you didn't do anything. Says Tyson, no, you have to say that if you only had the Sefer of the Mishnah, I would have thought to say, what does it mean not with a razor? It means not like a razor. And that, however, but a cream that works like a razor, because it destroys it from the root, that would also be effective. Kamash Malan, the law. That's what teaches you to know that the Tekalachas is a mitzvah that you have to do with a razor. Now, Ketani learned the Mishnah that says over there, the Mishnah there in the Sefer says, and all of them that cut their hair without a razor, they didn't do anything. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Rabbi Shloimy Gabi Nazir, I understand by Nazir that it says in the Torah, Tali Amal Reisha. It says that a razor should not go over his head. So that's like how we explain, according to Tanakama, if it's not teaching you anything regarding Malchus, this was the end of the previous Daf, so it's going to teach something regarding the Tegalachas, that it has to be with a razor. According to Rabbi, from the fact that you had the words Admalais near the words Taloyaber, we learned that it has to be with a razor. In other words, here it's not enough Ke'in Tar. You have to have with a razor when you finish the procedure. That's how I know that a Nazir's mitzvah is with a tar. Regarding Levim, it also says in the pasuk, it says, V'viru tar, Akol b'savim, says in the Torah, you have to use a razor. Fine. But a mitzvah, how do you know that his mitzvah cutting the hair is with a razor? Okay, if you're going to say from Levim, from Levim Ma'Levim, you're going to say, okay, what are we from by Levim? She came to Teglachas, they have to do a hair cutting ceremony. And the hair cutting only was with a razor. Oh, okay, from the Avi, I have a tzeicha, so I'll learn mitzvah the same way. So time the glachas, he also has to cut up the body, his body here. Then the glachas, but then he kind of would only be with a razor. Problem is, you could ask and say, wait a second, you can't learn that from Levium, because Malavim they have a stringency. She came to nuf begufam. They had to go ahead and have their body waved. That's another thing that the Eishes Karak said. It says they cut up all your body here. They throw you up in the mosh pit here. They just like wave you around. It says behein v'amnes Levim t'nuf l'mnei Hashem. In contrast, Temim Mitzayra Delay. By Mitzayra, he doesn't require tenu for his own body to be waved. His carbon is waved, but not his body. So therefore, it doesn't require the stringency of a razor. And maybe you say a scissor is going to be effective. So it says, okay, you're right. You can't learn that from Levium. Elatate. Nazir learn from the other one of the three, from Nazir. Mala Nazir, and you'll say, oh, okay, Nazir requires a razor to He says, no. Mala Nazir, you can say, what do you find by a Nazir? Shekin Kabbanan Torah Lachem. The carbon of a Nazir, besides the animal carbon, required bread carbon that's coming along with it. Ten minutes what do you say about Mitzvah doesn't require bread cup to be brought the carbon, so it doesn't have that stringency. So maybe it's not going to stringent razor. So okay, you were Ella right. You cannot learn that from one of them, either Nazir or Levium. But Tesim Learn it from both of them. It says, well, Mehei Tesim. Meaning, where you learn that from? You'll say, Tesim Levium, learn from Levium. Then you're going to say, Levium, what do you mean you find Levium? She came to Begufa. No, you can't learn from Levium, you have to whip the body. Okay, Nazir here. Nazir will disprove that and say, that's not the reason why you have the stringency of a razor, because us Nazir also has as a razor, and we don't have Chinuf Begufa. So what are you going to say? Mal Nazir, you can say, but you can't learn from Nazir, you can't come on to Lechem because the carbon requires bread. Oh, well, Levium will disprove that because they don't require bread in their carbon. So B'chazad did. So the Allah is going to go back and he'll say, okay, this one's characteristic is not like this one, but this one's characteristic is not like that one. So that's not the reason why you have a razor. So we go with the common denominator. What do they have in common? Not the waving of the body and not regarding the bread and the carbon, it's that they require hair cutting. And the hair cutting has to be with a razor. So I'll also bring the mitzvah. The glachas requires the hair cutting, and the hair cutting is going to be with a razor. That's how we know that all these three, Nazir, Mitzvah, and Levium, have the halacha of their ceremony being done with a razor. However, only Rav Shloimy is not happy with this. He says, wait a second, this Mahatzad is missing something. Because you should ask, what do you find the common denominator? As we continue to base, Ein Korbanai Bedalas. The carbon of Nazir and Levium, there the halacha is actually, they don't have this halacha of, if you can't afford it, that you can bring a cheaper carbon. There's a certain set carbon, whether you're wealthy or poor. Taima b'mitzayra, Hagen to mitzayra, which has a leniency, and therefore maybe has the leniency of not having a razor, shekabane b'dalas. What happens is, if a mitzayra is a poor guy, he brings birds. And if there's so, we shouldn't be stringent him to require a razor. So how can you learn from the Mahatzad? Now, so Taisus, don't ask, because Taisus is bothered by a question. Is wait a second. We're coming out that, okay, we learn a mitzvah from another pasuk, ultimately, not from Nazir. Because Taisus is bothered, he says that we can learn that as the Gemara is going to prove from Ziknai or from Nazir, that we're going to bring shortly. But the question is, why do we learn that Nazir then? Either Taisus Gear says Mahatzad, or the gear says actually a Mametzinu. But the point is, why do we learn that Nazir then from Mitzayra? So because then you would be able to ask that you say that no, there's no she'ela by the halacha of Mitzayra in contrast to that of Nazir, or because the whole body of Mitzayra requires a hair cutting in contrast to that of Nazir. So you wouldn't be able to learn out Nazir from Mitzayra, but the question is, Mitzayra, you shouldn't be able to learn out from Nazir and not from Levium. Another question says the Gemara, he says, I don't understand. High Tana, this Tana, Me'ikava, originally, the Bryce that we quoted before, Amar, he said, if you recall, this was on the bottom line of Lamed Testament base. The Bryce had said, we wanted to know, how do you know that the Nazir has a razor? That's what Taisus was just asking. Taisus said, why don't you learn a Nazir from Mitzayra? Mitzayra doesn't end up being learned from Nazir. So Taisus says, no, you can't learn that from Nazir from Mitzayra for two reasons. But at one point, we were trying to figure out, how do we even know that a Nazir has a razor we know that although we keep on quoting this positive evaluation, that's actually by the Isser, not by the mitzvah when you finish. So we brought already the Gemara, Rebbe, Rabbanan, how to learn them. How do you know that you have to have a razor at the end? He said, because, okay, we're telling you not to have a razor until then, that means then you are supposed to have a razor. But we didn't know. We were trying to figure out in the Brisa, how do we know it? So he said, we can't learn it out from Mitzvah. The Brisa, Malam the Mitzvah, we said, you can't learn it out. You can't learn out from something lesser, something stringent, to be stringent on the lesser one, so you can't learn out Nazir Mitzvah. So wait a second. Says the Gemara, obviously the Tana knew that Mitzvah requires a razor without Nazir, because you're trying to learn out Nazir from Mitzvah. And then you're telling me, Neilav Medina. This Brisa wants to learn a Mitzvah that it requires a razor from a Mahatzad, from Mitzvah Hashaba of Nazir and Levim. Obviously, Mitzvah itself, you could only learn from Nazir. So how did that Brisa say you'll know Nazir from Mitzvah? As the Gemara even says, Medina Nameliov, and actually at the end of the day, you're not even learning out Mitzvah from Nazir on the Mahatzad. Because at the end we're going to learn out from Reishai that it says by Mitzvah. But one thing is, I don't understand. Do you know by Mitzvah you learn the Nazir from there, or you learning a Mitzvah from Nazir? So said the Gemara, it's not a difficulty. It's actually two different Tanoim. Amalei said to him, the Bryce that we mentioned before that took it for granted that we know this halacha of a razor by Mitzvah and we were trying to learn that Nazir from Mitzvah was Aliba de Rabban. This Bryce wants to learn out Mitzvah from Nazir and ultimately doesn't even learn it out from there is Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer, is according to Rabbi Eliezer, who he actually doesn't know that you have to have a razor by Mitzvah only from Nazir. As the Gemara is going to explain, that now, like we learned Mishnah Masechet Makis, last parak on the Chaf Meral. Mishnah says like this: you're now going to be liable. What's this talking about? This is talking about regarding payas of the zaken, not payas what we call by the head, payas of the beard. Meaning, there's the halacha by when you're not allowed to use a razor by your beard. It's 5 different. It's really the corners. In all of Judaism, it's everything the corners. The tzitzis, the payas, it's all payas of the field. Everything's corners. So it's corners of where consider the corners of the jaw. So whether Kahanim, whether Yisraelim, there's a prohibition of using a razor on the beard. So the Mishnah says you're not going to be chayav until you cut the hair with a razor. That's what the Tanna Kama holds. Rabbi Eliezer, he said that's the Rabbanan. So you see the Rabbanan hold that it's specific with razors. Rabbi Eliezer says no, it's like the Memalkit, but hitting even if you use some other tools that are plain or whatever that can smooth out things, and use that on your beard, chayiv can be liable. So it says the Gemara, what's the reason Rabban? In other words, from where are you learning out from this machlekes in the Mishnah Masechet Makis, that it is obvious to the Chachamim that Mitzayra used a razor, even without Nazir, like they held. And in contrast, you're telling Rabbi Eliezer that he holds otherwise. So it says the Gemara, because the time I learned the Brisa. It's a little bit confusing because we're going through many different topics of Mitzayra, of meaning or payas of the beard or payas of the head, but the Brisa says like this: Ziknai says his beard. Matam. Now this pasuk is actually by the Mitzayra. It says on the 7th day that he should go ahead and cut his hair of his whole body. It's kol sa'arei. Now it also says his head and his beard. Now the question is, well, beard is included in all his hair, so why are you specifying Ziknai, his beard? That's the Bryce's question. Oh, it says the Bryce, I'll tell you what. Because it says by Kahanim. That's also confusing because the same Yisurim, which is similar, it says by Kahanim separately than by Israel. But okay, it says by Kahanim, the corners of the beards, they're not going to use a razor, they're not going to cut it off. Now, you would think, even if he's a Mitzayra, in other words, if let's say the Kohen is a Mitzayra, you would think that would be the same thing that he cannot shave off his beard. It says v'gilach as kol sa'arei. Obviously, it would be without his beard. Or, as Tais explained, his beard fell out. Because the positive commandment of cutting off all his body hair does not override the negative prohibition of destroying the beard of the Kohanim and the mitzvah say of Kadoshim Tiyu, which the Kohanim said that they have to keep those mitzvahs. That's why I have to say ziknoi, extra word that are written by Mitzayra to let you know that the positive commandment of ziknoi overrides the negative prohibition of the Kohanim not cutting off their beards and the mitzvah aseh kedushin to you. Now, Tais points out, even though generally we don't say aseh dechalei, say ba'aseh, this is a positive commandment of the Mitzayra cutting off all his body here, overriding the negative prohibition of shaving off and mitzvah aseh kedushin to you to keep that beard. Here it's going to override this. The Gemara says in the beginning of the Daf Yomi Aleph, because this is what's called a lava seisha inishad b'kovel. Although it's a negative prohibition and a positive that usually we don't override with positive, but it's not a universal one because destroying the beard does not apply to women. As the Gemara says, first women are allowed to use a razor on their jaw, and therefore it's not such a strong lois aseh. And therefore the aseh of cutting all your body hair as a material will override the lava aseh. Then the taste is maybe even to say maybe it's only coming to permit just a negative prohibition of leisashches pasik kanecha of just not to shave. How do you know it's overriding an aseh too? It says taste is that no, because it's logical that you could say that the pasik is unspecific. It's both by Yisrael, just like Kohanim, and Kohanim have a pasik and a kedushin to you included in that issue. So you're learning how to say ve'aseh. Additionally, Taisa says, this is the primary pshat. Obviously, according to Rabbanan, regarding just a negative prohibition that a regular Yisrael has, I don't need a pasuk. Because that really learned that from Roshai, from the first part of the pasuk, which that tells us that the Aseh Mitzayra overrides the negative prohibition of cutting off the payas of the head. Because that Tana holds that cutting off all the hair of the head is considered Hakafas Araish, which is violating the Isar Payas. That's Machlekes, as the Gemara is going to tell shortly. So if that's the case, Zikna, I don't need you to tell me for a regular Yisrael, because I already know it takes a lav from Roshai. So must be come and tell you for Kohanim, and to tell you that the Aseh Mitzayra is not only a negative prohibition, but also an Aseh, a lav ve'aseh, of destroying the beard of Kohanim. Now, from the fact that the pasuk of Zikna is coming to permit you destroying the beard, and destroying the beard is only liable if you use a razor, that's why it's connected to what we just brought a moment ago, regarding if it's with a razor or not. So the inference is that by Mitzayra, the hair cutting must be only with a razor. Because if not, what do I need Zikna for? Because you don't need a razor. Obviously, that's where the Rabbanan know that it has to be with a razor. Which the Gemara says, how do you know it has to be with a razor? In other words, that the liability of destroying the beard, how do you know according to Rabbanan that it's only with a razor, that from there you're learning out that must be that the material requires a razor to tell me that it's going to be deicha, because that's what Zikna is coming to teach you. The time I learn the Brisa. It says in the pasuk that the corners of the beard are not let us shave off, which it says there by Kohanim. So Yochel, you would think, I feel like Gilcha b'misparamiach, you would think he'd be liable even if he cuts off his beard with scissors. Tamalim, it says no, but leisashches, that is not let it destroy pa'asa kanecha, the corners of your beard, which that says tastes the pasuk by Yisrael. But by scissors, there's no hashchasa, because you don't take out the hair from its roots and uproot it. Now, then the Brisa says that Eloi Sashkas, if I only had not to destroy, so Yochelikat Bilmalkin but hitni Yechayv, you would think that if you use a plane or some type of a smoothing instrument, you don't speak because they also destroy the hair from the roots. No, Tamar says the pasuk that the corners of the beards are now let it shave off. Now that's not called kiluach, because that's not what you usually use for shaving. So okay, so what is the violation in what category? What's something that is shaving, meaning what do you usually use for hair cutting, that also destroys? That is a razor. That's how I know that the Isser is with a razor, and that's what the Torah is coming to permit you by a Mitzayra, even if he's a Kohen. As the Gemara Kedusha learns out, Peya from Yisrael and from Kohanim, that they have the same Isser, and therefore by Mitzayra we're coming to tell you that we're permitting even a Lava Aseh, and that's how you see that it must be that the Mitzayra must be that you have to use a razor. And again, because that was our whole question, we wanted to know, well, what was the one that was obvious? Is it Mitzayra or Nazir? So I said, oh, don't worry, one's Rabbanan, one's Eliezer. So we're saying, what do you mean, according to Rabbanan, where do we find this halacha? What's, like we said, my Tamar de Rabbanan, what's the reason? Meaning, where do they have this idea from? Where do they know that Pasha the Mitzayra was Batar, even without Nazir? Not like we're saying that we want to learn from Nazir, because that's like according to Eliezer. They're the ones who assume, as we had on Daf Lamates, on the Beis, that they knew Mitzayra, just want to learn Nazir on Mitzayra. That's this source that we just said. We learned it out from Ziknoi, From there we can infer that if I'm coming to be mated, obviously, because that S is only with a tar. So if I'm mated by mitzvah, it must be because mitzvah requires tar. That's where the Rabbanan know it from. Now it says the Gemara, wait a second. Mimai. Where do you know that the hair cutting of mitzvah is only possible with a razor? No, how do you know? Maybe I'll tell you always, I feel a licked b'malkin but hit me. Maybe even if you use like some type of a smoothing instrument like woodworkers use. Maybe not a mitzvah covered. Maybe you also fulfill the mitzvah of his hair cutting. Then you're telling me what do you need the pasig of ziknei for? Oh, that's kasher. That's only coming to tell me that even if you use a razor, you're not going to be liable. Meaning, if you do the hair cutting with a razor, then you could do that. And even though that you're prohibited in general to cut off the corners of the beard, you're not going to be chayav. I don't think that you have to use a razor. Maybe even if you use a razor. Says the Gemara, no. Amri, they said, in other words, you have to say the ziknei that says in the pasuk is coming to require the hair cutting to be done with a razor, and not with something else. Why? Because Isa didn't even think to say that if you're going to do it with a plane with some type of smoothing instrument, shapadami that would fulfill your obligation of your hair cutting ceremony as a mitzvah, then the pasuk should have been silent. Meaning, if it's coming to tell me that you're allowed to go ahead and cut with a razor the corners of the beard, for that I don't need to have the pasuk of ziknai. For permission, I know from a kal v'chomer. What's this kal v'chomer? Oh, I'll tell you why. Banamina, I would say, if you find by Nazir, the isura ka'avid, that you're doing an isur. Meaning, as Tais explains, skipping one Tais, is that even a Nazir that's tahar is a little bit of a sinner, as the Gemara brought in the beginning of Nadarim, and we had this in Perek Shlish, Daf Yomi Aleph, that any's called a chayte, a Nazir is a sinner because he wasn't drinking wine. Additionally, says Taisus, that we actually can learn out from a Nazir that's tummy, because by him also his hair cutting is also with a razor, as the Gemara sounds like shortly. So we learn out a tahar from tummy and tummy from tar, and even so, the taklakas of his mitzvah overrides the negative prohibition of hakafa, of cutting off the payas by mitzvah, because he holds hakafa's colorish. If you cut off all the hair, not only the payas, that's considered cutting off the payas. And even so, even though by a nazir that you didn't isser by being a nazir, even so, the halacha requires that you cut off all the hair on your body, and it overrides the negative prohibition of cutting off your payas, which Taisa points out that the Gemara could have asked that a kohen that's mitzayra you will not learn out, because we find many mitzvahs more by a kohen than by regular Yisrael. And that's actually how the Gemara generally asks these type of questions, like in Yavamis, Nafhei, and therefore that's why the asay of mitzayra should not be deichel of kahana. How can you learn that from Nazir? Additionally, what are you going to say by Nazir? That's just a negative prohibition that's overriding the lav of Akafa. By Kahanim, there's a lav of Nasei. There's a lav of Ashchazazak and there's a Nasei of Kadeshim Tiyu. So what is the Gemara trying to say now? Oh, to permission, I would know that. So it says you're right. We could have asked that right now at this point. But we're relying primarily on the last question that we're going to ask from Rish Lakish. But at this point, the Gemara wants to say, no, it must be that you have to use a razor. To allow you to use a razor? I don't need to allow. Of course you're allowed to use a razor. Because if by Nazir you did an Isra, and even so the Torah is machayim you to use to use the razor. Okay, so over here by Mitzayra, the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. The pasuk says you have to cut the hair, and it didn't come through any Isra. You didn't do anything wrong by becoming Mitzayra, even though you probably did some type of hair became Mitzayra. But the Gemara somehow understands that you didn't volitionally do that, so it's better than Nazir. Also, here where it's a mitzvah, like Kolshkin isn't all the more so that for sure the taklachas of the mitzvah would override the negative prohibition of cutting the hair. So that I don't need permission. Obviously, if it's saying ziknai, it's telling me that you have to use a razor. And Tais says, wait a second. If you're going to ask and say, wait a second, by Nazir has a stringency because its carpet requires bread, as we explained previously, why we couldn't learn a mitzvah from Nazir. So how are you learning from Nazir for this halacha? So it says, no, you can't compare the two contexts. Before, most definitely, when you wanted to require a razor for mitzvah and not other mashchisim, the Gemara asked very well and said that how can you learn from Nazir? Nazir, of course, requires the stringency of a razor because it has some other stringency that its covering requires bread. But over here, we don't want to learn out to require a razor by mitzayra from the taglachas of Nazir. We're just saying that he has permission to use a razor like other mashchisim. You can't ask a pircha, because we're not trying to learn a chumrah from Nazir. If anything, it's actually a leniency to allow. So, of course, a Nazir, which is like you did an Isser, of taking an end of Nazir, you're allowed to use a razor. For sure, here we know. But says Taisa, but it's still a wonder, because this sugya of the Rabbanan, how is it obvious that according to Rabbanan, that they knew Pasha, which is what the whole point of this Gemara is trying to say, that there's a loch of a razor by the Taglachas of Metzeva before we knew it from Nazir, that we're saying that the previous Bryce had said, oh, you can't learn now from Metzeva, so obviously by Metzeva is Pasha to Rabbanan that you require a razor for the hair cutting without Nazir. But says Taisus, what do you mean? You tell me if not for the Kavachim from Nazir, to tell me that Zikna means that you have to tell me you're allowed to, I know that from the Kavachim, but that's still learning out from Nazir. And this is the Rabban that you're trying to prove to me that they knew Mitzvah before Nazir. So this Taisus, that's not a problem, because even if they didn't know yet that there's a mitzvah of razor by Nazir, still it's a good Kavachim from Nazir, that the hair cutting procedure would override cutting off the payas of the head, because cutting off the payas of the head, which is what we're talking about right now, is violated even without a razor, as we know. And I'll cut the payas with scissors. That sounds like shortly from the Gemara on Amid Beis. So that's what we're saying, that it should be permitted for him to cut off even with a razor and violate the issue of cutting the beard, which is with a razor. See, obviously the pasuk of Zikna is coming to require a razor and not other mashchisim. That's where the Gemara is at this point. So says the Gemara, so for permission, I wouldn't need to. But moreover, the main point really of the Gemara is the next point. As you continue to talk about Memal and Menal. Moreover, says the Gemara, Yisak, that's a good thing to say, because like we said, really this is not a good Talachem, as Taisa said. So that wouldn't prove to me that you have to use a razor, because of permitting a razor I would know from Nazir. That's not really true. But really the main point is the next point. Moreover, Yisak, that's a good thing to say, that if you do the final hair cutting with a plane, with some type of a sandpaper, that mitzvah of it, that you would fulfill the mitzvah of Giluach, that obviously the pasuk of Zikna is not coming to tell me that you could do it with a razor. Midalike siv tav, in other words, explicitly, you require us to tell me that Kiddush Lakish, like Rish Lakish. Because the Amr, he says, anytime you have a positive and opposing negative prohibition, if you could go ahead and fill both of them, then good. But if not, then the positive commandment comes and overrides the negative prohibition. So, as Taisa explains this final point, that according to Rish Lakish, you're not allowed to go ahead and use the hair cutting with a razor, because you could fulfill both of them. You could cut your hair with a sandpaper, and then they wouldn't be able to override the negative prohibition of cutting off the beard. Which Taisa says the Gemara really should have said that we don't permit a razor for the fact that it doesn't say razor. It's just that the Gemara has this like abridged wording, because the wording in Masechet Nazir is not as a little bit not as good as the other Masechtas, and many times it just doesn't say the whole thing. But one thing you see from the Gemara is obviously that the pasuk of Zikna is coming to tell me that you have an obligation and requires you to use a razor by Mitzvah, and that you're not going to fulfill the obligation only with a razor because it was allowing you. Then why would we allow you? If you can do it with other things, then you cannot override the Isra of Hashchas Hazak. Must be that it's requiring you, because like Rosh Hashanah says, if you can do it, then you're not allowed to. Must be it's a chiyuv, and that's your allowance, and again, that's how we know that a mitzvah also has this halacha of using with a razor, and that's the Rabbanan Shita that we knew this all along, from Zikna. In contrast to the other brass that's saying, oh, maybe we should learn that out from Nazir. From Nazir you want to learn from Mitzvah is first. Oh, that was Rabbanan. Rabbi Lezer is the one who doesn't hold this dafka with a tar. He only knows it from Nazir or some other source. That was those two different prices, and that's why it's not difficult thing to any time. So, it's gonna be a special place in